Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 74.
I like building alliances with people that are trying to do good things in society. I mean, I love it when people get together and do a good project.
That was a participant in an urban-rural action project in Southern Oregon. Urban-rural action works in some of the most divided parts of the country, bringing people together across political, cultural, and racial lines.
My role in the project is I'm one of the volunteers for Jackson County, one of the uniters. Our role was to come up with a project that would impact a community in our county.
What I really loved about it is learning skills to work together with a diverse group to be able to get something done. So we got something really tangible done. Then it will continue on. One of our taglines is building relationships across differences. And I think working on a common goal really helps that.
At a time when polarization is pulling us apart, stories like these show that it is possible to build trust, repair relationships, and work together for something bigger than ourselves. Today you'll hear from someone who leads this work, helping communities across the country bridge divides and plant seeds of lasting change.
I'm Hamman. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Urban Rural Action, which is a national organization that does community-based work in communities around the country to bring people together across lines of difference to take positive action together in their communities.
I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and on this episode of Outrage Overload, Hamman will share how urban-rural action is helping communities break down barriers, and why there's reason for hope even in the most divided places. That's all coming up. Stay with us. Hamman, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know I got a chance to listen to you speak at a conference or a webinar that you participated in, and I was really excited to see what you were doing. And I think one of the things that stands out about urban rural action is right there in the name, right? Action.
Yeah.
And I think it's we've talked to Rich Harwood a few times on the program. And I'm sure you're kind of aware of what he's doing, and I kind of got a sense there was some similarities there about this kind of notion. He's got kind of the idea of this civic action and civic a civic path towards sort of getting out of some of this toxic polarization we're in, or at least lowering the temperature so we can sort of be in the same room together and kind of and try to get things done and sort of doing things together as being the way. So can you walk us through that a little bit? How people take action in their own communities and what does that mean across differences, and what does that really look like?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, we work in groups of usually 4 or 5 contiguous counties in parts of the country where polarization is particularly problematic, in the sense that it has gotten to the point where people can't address problems in their communities effectively. Local trust in institutions has broken down, and often this becomes a risk factor for violence. In some cases, it actually has already led to violence in some of these communities. So we're talking about polarization on, kind of a pretty severe level. And we establish deep roots in these communities. We work with local trusted leaders in the communities, community-based leaders who become the leaders in our programs. And often these are just community members. They don't have any particular training in this, but they are invested in their communities and they are invested in working across differences. And with them and also with local community organizations that are doing work to address needs in the communities, we bring together cohorts of about 25 to 35 community members from all backgrounds, all experiences, all perspectives, all walks of life, to spend about 9 months meeting every 2 to 4 weeks in person, rotating around the counties in the area to build relationships. That's a critical piece. And they build relationships by building skills together, skills in constructive conversation, skills in problem analysis and joint problem solving, skills in conflict management, all sorts of things that are really critical in order for them to be able to work together as a cohort in the course of the program, but that are also transferable to outside the program that they can bring back to their communities and their own constituencies to try to spread this kind of idea of working together across differences to address problems. And so, as you said, that's when the action piece happens. So they learn all these skills, they develop these relationships, and then they use those skills and relationships in collaboration with the community partner and led by the Your Action team member who is embedded in the community, lives in the community, who we call a county coordinator, to develop and implement an intervention in the community to address something that they have all agreed is a problem. So they develop this intervention together, which is very hard to do across lines of difference. And that also strengthens their trust and their relationships across lines of difference. And then to actually make it happen, is a huge piece of making the relationships durable and strengthening the community fabric.
Yeah, that's there's a lot there. I can see so many challenges along that path, right? So that's great work that's going on. You know, you mentioned that these districts you're going into, or the communities you're going into, are particularly polarized. How does that kind of come to your attention? I mean, how do they come to you? How do you discover? How does that surface?
That's a great question, and I will say it has changed over the life of the organization. We've been active since about our first program launched in 2019, so we're going on 6 years of this. Originally, it was sort of kind of paying attention to what's going on, and also, as I said, it's really important to us that we are deeply rooted in communities. So we go deep, not wide. We don't have programs everywhere. And when we have a program somewhere, we develop that into a local hub and stay there, indefinitely, essentially. And so where we're able to do that is a part of the equation, right? Like, where do we have connections that can support that kind of engagement? And so in the early days, it was a kind of a question of looking around and saying, where could we do this? Where do we have the kinds of relationships that we need among the places that fit this profile? Where do we have the kind of relationships that we need to make it happen? More recently, places have been coming to us and asking us to bring our programming to them, which, I think everywhere would benefit from a United for Action local hub. And unfortunately, we don't have the bandwidth or the personnel to do it everywhere, but we certainly we take all of those requests seriously, and we engage with the communities that are interested in bringing us to them.
And so what does it mean when you say that we turn them into a hub? What does that mean?
So the first thing I described is what is kind of our foundational program. It's called a Uniting for Action program. In addition to that, we have sort of lighter touch versions of the curriculum and skills that we develop in those programs, which, as I said, is a tremendous time commitment. It's like around 9 months, meeting in person all day on a Saturday, every few weeks. Not everyone has that kind of time. Not everyone can make that kind of commitment. And so we take a lot of those skills and we offer them as public-facing workshops in collaboration with community organizations, community institutions like public libraries, faith communities, schools, to reach a wider audience within the same region, within the same geography. So they're open to the public. Anyone can come. They're free. Often the Uniters, we call the participants in our programs Uniters, often they assist with them or come to them or recruit people to attend or connect us with their own faith community or whatever to offer these workshops. So that's a second piece. In a hub, we do that kind of programming for the broader community. And then the third piece, which is actually brand new, is called Powering Pluralism and Democracy. And this is a sort of adaptation of the first thing I described, the Uniting for Action program, aimed at local leaders, local institutional leaders, rather than at individual citizens kind of across the spectrum. So the idea is that one of the major problems, both I think causes and effects of this toxic polarization is that trust in institutions has broken down even at the local level. And, that becomes this negative feedback loop. Well, it's a positive feedback loop, but it's the result is negative, where, which is bad for everyone. And so the strengthening of community fabric, the strengthening of community relationships across difference that we do in our Uniting for Action programs is a big piece of rebuilding community trust. But another piece is rebuilding community trust in institutions. And in order for the community to trust its institutions, the institutions have to be worthy of trust. And so the idea is to gather local leaders, teach them many of the same types of skills, and have them build many of the same types of relationships across their own cohort of leaders, but also with the uniters from the programs in the same hub. And to identify and implement not the kinds of projects that Uniting for Action programs do, but reforms in their institutions that will allow them to become more effective, more transparent, and more responsive to community needs. So those are the three big pieces of a hub.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was going to ask that because you said that I heard you say that in your talk, along paraphrasing, but something along the lines of people have to trust institutions, but institutions have to become trustworthy. Right. That really struck a chord with me. So how does that work? Like, what does that look like on the ground, and what kind of success have you had with that?
Well, as I said, it's brand new, so it's too early to report on success. I will say interest in it is very, very high. From institutional leadership and from, the sort of community members in the hub at large. It's because we have these deep roots in the communities that we work in, that allows us an entry point into, we often know many of the community leaders already. Sometimes they've been in our programs. We've had several mayors in our programs. We've had, leaders of, we've been elected, like school board members. So we often already know many of the players, and they know us, maybe more importantly. So the sort of bringing them together piece, I think, is facilitated by the existing relationships and trust that has been built between your action and the community. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can imagine that's a challenging problem for sure. And I was just curious, like boots on the ground, how do you really do that? And I suppose it's a bit of a one-off question too. I mean, every organization is different.
That's such an important point. Like everything is contextual in this work. People love to talk about scalability, and it is a really important consideration. And you cannot do meaningful, impactful, community-based work that is the same across communities, because every community is different and communities know what they need. So we don't tell them what they need. We help them figure out what they need and how to make it happen and support them in doing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably key to that there being some success in this too. You're not going in there with like an agenda here. We need to go down
Correct.
This path.
That's right. That's right. Our only agenda is to make the community stronger.
Yeah. Having done this show for a while, I have listeners and get feedback from listeners. And, listeners aren't professional bridge builders or anything, but they've sort of self-selected into at least kind of wanting to understand some of this space more and some of these issues more. And, a really recurring theme, and I'm curious to see if you see this, is even just bringing up this idea that you're going to have a conversation with folks with differing views. People just bristle at it. Like they are... Yeah. Just that there's no way that's going to work. Those people are the way they are, and this kind of thing. Yeah. And so, I guess my first question: do you see that? And then, secondly, what have you seen as some ways that can maybe help at least get people to start taking down that first, going down that first path?
Yeah, absolutely. It's scary to try to talk to someone who is on the other side of an issue that's important to you, on a variety of levels, I think. And we also, have often, many of us, been burned by trying to do that. Um, maybe by not doing it necessarily so well. And so I think the answer to your second question is our framework, the ABCs of constructive conversation, is this very simple to understand framework that we teach everybody. Basically, anything you do with your action, you will hear about this. And it's really, really effective. It's really effective and it's really easy to grasp. And so we start with really, really structured conversations where where you're not allowed to express your own opinion. You have to just try to understand what the person you're talking to thinks and why they think that. You have to be curious about them. Curiosity is maybe the most important ingredient in building these kinds of relationships and having these kinds of conversations. Genuine curiosity, not the kind of curiosity that's looking for where I can attack you, but the kind that's really wants to understand you as a human being. And that's the other piece is appreciating people's humanity, right? Whether they agree with you or not, you can disagree all you want with their position or their opinion, but you have to appreciate them as a human being. And so, so this very, very structured, but also very, very simple, technique for having those conversations helps strengthen the muscles that have often atrophied because we don't engage with people across difference much anymore, except to shout at them, in social media bubbles. And so that practice and that workout of those muscles is what allows people to then move from the very structured version of the conversation to the less structured conversations that they'll need to have in order to develop the project and implement the project, because they've gotten accustomed to asking questions from curiosity, making sure they really understand what someone's saying before they give their own opinion, all that stuff. And maybe even more importantly, they've built this relationship and this trust. So, where you and I may have come from totally different ends of the spectrum into this program and think we have nothing in common, by the time we get to the point where we need to navigate our differences to make this project happen, there's a level of trust between us that we understand that each other are trying to do the right thing, and that we will be more likely to be able to do the right thing if we work on it together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one reason why so many of these things go wrong in sort of, typical scenarios, because we sort of don't build that trust first, and we just sort of dive in with our ideology at the sort of as the most salient point. Right?
Absolutely true. I totally agree. Yeah.
Right off the bat. Yeah, I was hoping you could share a couple of the sort of human element sides of this that I heard you talk about in your talk, and one was a story, the two participants from the opposite ends of the spectrum who changed the dynamics of their school board. If maybe you can tell listeners a little bit about that story. I think that was a touching story as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so these are two community members who live in the same community in Pennsylvania and are on opposite ends of the political spectrum. And because of that, so when the program started, which was early 2023, like February 2023, one of them was already an elected member of the school board. And the other had done some political work for the other party. Although I should mention that school board is technically nonpartisan, but we all know how that works, right?
Right. And we all know real life.
So they knew of each other. And because of these political differences, I think they were suspicious of each other. They didn't hate each other or anything, but they didn't really know each other. And what they did know, they were like, I don't know about that, right? And so over the course of the program, they got to know each other because that's a huge focus of our program. And they liked each other. They became good friends. And they really learned to trust each other. They saw each other as full human beings and understood where each other were coming from, even though they continued to disagree. And I think this is an important point that is often misunderstood. Being able to understand someone else's perspective doesn't mean you adopt that perspective, right? It doesn't even mean that you move towards the center. It just means that you can hold something in your mind that isn't your own idea.
Right.
So they were able to do that with each other. And they, yeah, as I said, they genuinely became friends outside the program. And about halfway through the program, maybe 2/3 of the way through the program, Steph, so I should mention, I guess, that Lance is the one who is already on the school board. He's an African-American man. He leans left on many things. Steph, white woman, leans right on many things, ran for school board. Lance was still on. He wasn't up for re-election at this point. And she won. And she, first of all, she was attacked frequently during the campaign. I mean, you know, in the way that unfortunately candidates frequently are these days, not physically attacked. And Lance went to bat for her several times. And then when she was elected, everyone sort of expected that they would retreat to their corners with the other people on this board, which was very divided to the point where they hadn't really been able to make progress on a lot of the kinds of issues that they needed to discuss. They couldn't have a discussion without it devolving into a fight. But Lance and Steph refused to do that. They were friends. They refused to, you know, become enemies because of this school board dynamic. And the fact that they could engage with each other and with the other constituency that they were, like, in some sense part of, just shifted everything. It didn't mean that the school board suddenly agreed about everything by any means, but it meant that they started being able to have difficult conversations in a productive way so that they could identify common ground and move forward, which is huge for the community.
Right. I mean, you know, the toxic polarization on its own is bad, like it's not good, but the effect of it, which is this sort of stifling everything, is what's particularly bad for democracy and for government.
Certainly yes, it's very hard to govern when you're just at an impasse all the time.
Right. And then that typically escalates, like you were saying before, sometimes because you kind of run out of options, you feel your back's against the wall. Then these other alternatives like violence and stuff start to sound reasonable.
Right. Yeah, you start to perceive the other side as an existential threat.
Right.
Right. And of course, an existential threat must be neutralized. And so that's when we need to, as you said, cool it down and, you know, begin to have these conversations.
Yeah, and it was interesting that you noted this idea that a lot of us have, and I get it, it's probably some sort of natural human trait that we think if we listen to the other side, we're then going to somehow be changed, like we're going to somehow have to also agree with them or whatever. And it's kind of funny that we haven't been able to sort of you know, realize that no, those two things don't necessarily go together.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another story I found. You know, very interesting, kind of adds, I think, to the, I don't know, to me, it really showed how there's so many different facets and ways this can manifest, was the story about the Nigerian immigrant. It didn't feel like he belonged, and that was in Southern Oregon. And going through this program, it sort of really changed that belonging. I think belonging is a huge, another sort of step in lowering the temperature.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was just one brief conversation, and it wasn't even with me. It was with our executive director, who was at the end of that program, which had been focused on the economy. And he just offhandedly remarked over lunch, I think, that, you know, he hadn't felt like he belonged in this community, and he'd done this program, and now he felt like, oh yeah, no, because he knew it's this team of all these people who are really different from him and came from all different corners of the community, and they'd done this thing together. Yeah, he felt that he belonged in the community in a way that he hadn't previously, which as you said, is so important, that sense of belonging. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a 9-month commitment, you know, I'm always kind of frustrated with some of these programs that kind of have one event and people leave that event and think, well, now I'm a bridge builder.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it takes more than that. And so with that depth, you know, that's probably a big factor. And you did mention, you know, that's harder to scale, but at the same time, it's also, you know, probably the meaningful durability that we need. I mean, maybe you can just comment on some of that, but just how this longer engagement, you know, is sort of a difference and the from especially difference from sort of these one weekend workshops and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you were at the webinar with More in Common, and Callista talked a lot about their research, which has found that people really do want to connect with other people across lines of difference. And that one of the biggest things they want to do when they connect with people across lines of difference is make a difference, right? They don't just want to chat about it. They want to actually do something. There's also a recent report from the Trust for Civic Life that shows that even more starkly, perhaps. But anyway, the point is there's this growing body of research, right? That just having a conversation, while important, right? Like we do need to all learn how to talk to each other even when we disagree. That's a critical piece of a functioning democracy. So I don't mean to diminish that at all. And as you said, in order to make that a durable thing that actually affects change, in a lasting way, you need more than just the conversation. You need the common goal and the action towards the common goal, such that you've accomplished something positive that you all are proud of. I think personally, from my observations, it's also the case that, having a conversation is not easy, but it's a lot easier than doing something. And doing something together across lines of difference is really, really hard. And if you can stick it out and navigate all of the tensions and all of the disagreements and all of the conflict that necessarily comes along with doing something, even with people you agree with. I mean, think about, wallpapering the living room with your spouse, right? Like anytime you're trying to do something together, there's going to be tension and conflict. And when you disagree about so many fundamental things, or you have such different perspectives on things, that's going to be magnified hugely. And so doing that, going through that process, not only results in this really cool thing that's actually helping the community, and it does. And some of these things are really awesome. But it means that this relationship is built on something real, something large and solid that isn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talked about alumni staying engaged and becoming advocates, and you've also talked about the sort of expanded out kind of ripples of how this goes out. What's I'm sure that's part of it, but how about you summarize your vision for the impact of this kind of engagement? And it seems to me like it's really planting the seeds for like a larger shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's the hope, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, the alumni network is, I think, part of what's going on there is our vision for the hubs, that we have these roughly annual Uniting for Action programs. We are starting up these roughly annual pluralism and democracy programs. We've got all of these workshops, and that people who've been through our programs, the programs don't go on forever, but once you've experienced that, you're in a position to be a change agent, and that kind of change agent in your own community, to encourage other people to do those sorts of things, whether they join our programs or not, but to behave in those ways, to build those relationships, to work on things together. You have a lot of skills. You have a lot of skills that you can pass on, right? How to navigate conflict in a healthy way, how to solve a problem in a way that everyone feels good about. And so the alumni network, I think, is a critical piece of making sure that our hubs really are serving the communities in which they exist, that they are changing community dynamics in the way that I mentioned with Lands and Stuff, in the way that I mentioned about in Southern Oregon, but also rippling out even further beyond all of those kinds of direct program impacts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I love it. So, what's the best place for listeners? Where should listeners start? Obviously, there's a website. Is there anything else listeners might be a first step for listeners?
Well, as I said, we are deep, not wide. So we're not in every community. If we're in your community, we would love to have you join us for some of our public-facing workshops, or apply for a program when those applications open. We do have a program starting in Central Arizona. Pretty soon that application is open now. So you happen to have any listeners in Central Arizona, Maricopa and Yavapai counties, they'd be welcome to apply. We're also piloting programs in Central Indiana and Eastern North Carolina later this year. So those are other options that are coming up. Our programs in Southeastern Wisconsin, Southern Oregon, and South Central Pennsylvania are all underway right now, but they have lots of those public facing workshops. And so anyone you don't have to be a member of the community to come to the workshops. Of course, you have to get there somehow. They're not virtual. But if you're not in any of those programming areas, we do offer virtual offerings sometimes, and those are available on our website, youraction.org. Anyone from anywhere in the world can join our workshops and participate in those skill building kinds of activities. We also do offer customized workshops for private clients, so that's kind of a different thing, but we work with institutions of higher education, foundations, things like that to help their specific groups, whether that's students or fellows or employees. Even we've worked with some business leaders to help those folks learn a lot of these same skills of collaborating across difference. I mean, that's not my area within the organization, but I do know that inability to work together across difference is a huge impediment in many business and educational and other situations. So we do that as well. So I don't know if anyone's listening who has that situation in their professional life, that's a way that we work with. That's a way that we work with organizations outside of our hubs. And then I'll say also there are many organizations doing amazing work in a more wide way, maybe less deep, but although I don't want to say that for sure, they're just different. And so, the coalition of organizations doing this kind of work somebody touches almost everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I'm always finding, and I know people talk about how many different organizations there are, but I'm always finding something, another one all the time. So that's youraction.org. Kira Hamman, thank you so much for making time for our little show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If something in this episode sparked a thought, or maybe even lit a fire, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or even schedule a quick one-on-one chat right from our contact page at outrageoverload.net/contact. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to a podcast friend. This isn't an ad, just a friend whose show I think you might enjoy. Here's a short promo.
Hi there, this is Thomas, host of the Coyote Small Business Podcast. Like the Coyote, small business owners have to be persistent, resourceful, and just a little scrappy to survive. We look past the easy answers and dig into what really helps businesses thrive. So if you're ready to outsmart the competition, sidestep the traps, and maybe even laugh at a few Acme-style mistakes along the way, tune in to the Coyote Small Business Podcast. New episodes are released every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.